Okay, guys, so we just learned about James Madison and the War of 1812. Remember, James Madison was our fourth president, and now we're moving on to James Monroe, our fifth president. James Monroe, being our fifth president, was also a Democratic Republican. He had been Madison's Secretary of State, and now he became president. It's interesting to note that when James Monroe is president, that there was no longer a Federalist Party. Remember, we started with Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Then the Anti-Federalists turned into Democratic Republicans. Well, now, after the War of 1812, the Federalist Party collapsed completely. So we're at a one-party system when James Monroe is president. So there is no political struggle for power any longer. Because of this, the James Monroe presidency is often called the era of good feelings. The reason for this is because, it was a period characterized by lack of political disruption and that there was a lot of economic growth, meaning the U.S. made a ton of money. Along with this, nationalism spread. And remember, we've talked about nationalism before. It's when you have pride towards one's country. So really feeling good about the U.S. Also during this time, people started to shift their loyalty towards the federal government. Remember, for a long time, people were afraid of giving the federal government too much power. But during James Monroe presidency, that feeling changed. And people wanted the federal government to have a little bit more power. All right, so then we have Henry Clay. And Henry Clay has some ideas of how to give the federal government some more power. He was a representative from Kentucky, and he truly wanted the U.S. to be economically self-sufficient, meaning did not have to depend on trading with other countries for money or to get loans from other countries to have money. So one thing he felt like the U.S. needed to do was establish a protective tariff, which meant that it made foreign goods more expensive. When foreign goods are more expensive, that means U.S. citizens are more likely to buy U.S. goods. So this idea was all about buying American-made products, just like some people still advocate for today. He also wanted to establish a second national bank. We didn't speak of this before, but earlier, in around, I think it was 1811, the National Bank was dissolved. The charter for the National Bank had been suspended, meaning that it was not voted on to renew itself. So around this time, Clay decided we needed another national bank. We needed to promote a single currency. We didn't need separate currencies for different states and different areas of the U.S., and this would make trade easier. The last thing that Clay decided we needed to do to be more self-sufficient was to improve our transportation system. That way we could transport goods more readily and easily from one place to the next, making goods less expensive. Excuse me. So how are we going to do this? How are we going to make these improvements? One of the ways was to create a national road and an Erie Canal. The national road was a way to transport goods from Maryland, which is on the East Coast, all the way to Illinois, which was further west. It was designed as the country's main east-west route so that people could not only settle more westward, but also get their goods from one place to the next. Another way to improve the transportation of goods was the Erie Canal, and this was a man-made water route between New York City and Buffalo, New York. How was this helpful? This opened the Ohio River Valley and the Great Lakes to trade and settlement. It allowed the flow of manufactured goods from east to west, and it also helped New York City become the nation's largest city. It's still one of the largest cities today, and that is thanks to the Erie Canal. Sorry. Here's a picture of the International Road right here from Maryland to Illinois. Here is an image of the Erie Canal when it was first created. Here we go. This is the Erie Canal, a man-made system. All right, we're going to skip this pause and think for now, but just so you know, you're going to have to come back and do this shortly. All right, another big thing during James Monroe's presidency was the increased power of the federal government under the Supreme Court Justice John Marshall. He helps nationalism and he helps grow the power of the federal government. And two ways he does this is not only from the case during Madison's presidency, Marbury versus Madison, but also in these two Supreme Court cases. The first is known as McCulloch versus Maryland. In this case, Maryland wanted to tax its branch of the National Bank. Well, the head of the bank, McCulloch, refused to pay this tax and said it was unconstitutional for the state to get involved in a federally owned bank, which was the National Bank. So when it went to the Supreme Court, if it was deemed unconstitutional, that would say the federal government has the power. But if it was deemed constitutional for Maryland to tax the national bank, that would allow states to claim power over the national government. Well, the court said no, it was not constitutional for Maryland to tax the national bank. So what this did was created a stronger federal government and permitted unity of the federal government. A second case was Gibbons versus Ogden. This case was between two steamship operators fighting over the shipping rights between New York and New Jersey. Both felt like they had the right to own that area of shipping. The court ruled that neither of those personal steamship operators, could own that area. Instead, the court ruled that the interstate commerce, which means trade from one state to the next, would only be regulated by the federal government. And so again, this creates a stronger federal government and reflects a growing nationalism in the U.S. Finally, we get to the Missouri Compromise, which happened in 1820 during Monroe's presidency. If you look here, you can see a map of what the United States owns at this point in time. You can see in blue, those are free states and territories. You see in the reddish color, those are slave states and territories. In purple, those are closed to slavery during the in the Missouri Compromise. But then you have an orange open to slavery in the Missouri Compromise. And we'll explain what happened here. So Missouri applies for statehood in 1819, but Missouri wants slavery to be allowed. Well, at this time, we have 11 free states and 11 slave states. And the government likes this balance of free and slave states so that one group of states doesn't have more power over the other. If Missouri becomes a slave state, that would be 12 slave states and 11 free states. And it would ruin the balance. And the South would have more power in the government. What happened was Maine admitted with Missouri as a free state. So Maine said, we'll make sure that we stay a free state, we'll become a free state, and Missouri can then become a slave state. And then the Missouri Compromise also said slavery would be banned in the future territories north of the 36th, 30th lateral. So from here up, slavery would be banned. So Missouri can become a slave state. Maine is now free. And now we're back to being even. And the South does not have more power than the North. Henry Clay, who we spoke about earlier, who really wanted the U.S. to be self-sufficient economically, also led this compromise. So he played a large role in moving the U.S. forward during this time period. All right, as Monroe is president, the national boundaries continue to grow, and the U.S. begins to gain even more territory than it did before. So during Jefferson's presidency, we get the Louisiana Purchase, which was a way that doubled the size of the U.S. and was a big purchase for us. Well, during Monroe's presidency, 2 presidents later, he does a few things to grow our country as well. During this time, the relations with Spain were tense. They were disagreeing with the U.S. over where the boundaries were. What were the actual borders of our land versus their lands? Indians in the East, Florida, were raiding Georgia. So Spain owned Florida at this time and even part of the Gulf Coast up here. Indians kept seeping in to Georgia and attacking settlers that lived there. So Monroe sent Andrew Jackson to stop these raids. Remember, Jackson was a war hero during the War of 1812. People respected Jackson, and he really knew what he was doing in terms of working out deals with other countries and leading a raid if needed or violence if needed. What Andrew Jackson ends up doing, which some of you have done the activity for already and know this, that he ended up claiming Florida for the U.S. Monroe gave Spain a choice. We will either continue to police Florida and continue to send troops there, or you can give it to us outright. So Spain decides we're going to have to sign a treaty called the Adams-Onis Treaty of 1819 with the U.S. This treaty showed us that Spain would give the U.S. Florida. It created a new boundary line for the U.S. And not only did we gain Florida out of this deal, but Spain no longer claimed Oregon. And Oregon country is up here. So here we are growing our country and pushing even farther west than we had before. Now the Oregon country was only claimed by U.S. and Great Britain. Spain was no longer a part of that. Sectionalism grows. So remember how when I started this, we said that it was a one-party system at the time of James Monroe's presidency, and that's why it was called the era of good feelings. Well, sectionalism does grow. Sectionalism is loyalty to the interests of your own region rather than the country as a whole. So that means you are more loyal to maybe the South or the Northwest or the Northeast or the New England states or wherever it is that you are living than the country as a whole. Why did this happen? Because economic changes and the different trading that was happening and the different crops that were being grown and the different manufacturing being done, that led to different interests and needs among the North, South, and West. These interests were often in conflict with each other. The North made their money based on manufacturing and trade. The South obviously continued to be a plantation system where they would grow a lot of different crops and make money off those crops, including cotton. The West wanted cheap land and a good transportation system. So all of these needs were different, and a lot of times these needs cause arguments or fights. And so they would argue with one another, and it really created a divide between these three parts of the country. All right, moving on to another big part of James Monroe's presidency, and that is the Monroe Doctrine. What I would like you to do is I would like you to click on this link right here if it's available. I don't know if you can do that with this video, and if not, it's okay. But you could read over what the Monroe Doctrine is all about, and I will tell you what it's about as well. So during this time, in 1823, Latin American countries had gained independence from Spain and Portugal. So these countries down in this area and a little bit further to the left were no longer owned by Spain and Portugal. They had independence. The problem is that some European monarchs, kings and queens, said, you know what? We want that land back. We want to come back and grab those Latin American countries and own them again. Well, the U.S. felt threatened. They thought, you know what? We don't want a monarchy near us. We fought for independence. So did these countries, Latin American countries, fight for independence. We want to help them avoid the monarchs taking them back. So James Monroe wrote a law called the Monroe Doctrine. This doctrine stated that Americas were closed to European colonization. So basically it said no European countries can colonize or try to own any land in North or South America. The U.S. would stay out of European affairs if they stayed out of our affairs. And it basically showed European nations that the U.S. considered itself a world power and it meant business. That's all I have for you on James Monroe at this time. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask, and hopefully you understand it better because I talked you through it. Thanks, and have a good one. Bye.